Hey there, friends and enemies. JoPaWrites here again, and today I want to talk about what happened with The Division 2 and reasons why it never really reached the heights of the original. There are so many factors that are involved, and I wanted to jump into all of that with you guys from my personal perspective. Obviously, not everyone's going to agree with this, but this is just my thoughts on the situation. So, first and foremost, I think sequels in the looter shooter space are very difficult and not going to happen a ton, especially within shorter release windows. What I mean by that is the original game still being updated and then the sequel being released shortly thereafter within a year. In order to release a sequel with enough content and with enough innovative content, that's the key. You can plop down a game with a ton of content, but because of the way the higher ups look at these games and needing to generate revenue and all that kind of good stuff, they don't leave the developers enough time from making the original content to the sequel content to really maximize on the talents of the developers, because we saw this with the original Division, right? We saw this with the original Destiny. The original Division had Dark Zone, which was very innovative at the time, Survival, which was very innovative at the time. Destiny had raids, which we'd never seen in a shooter before, and coming up with something new takes time and trial and error, right? That's just the way game development works. Unfortunately, both the Division and Destiny made the same mistake. Now, Destiny, I think, recovered very, very well over the course of time, but the Division, I don't think, ever fully recaptured the magic from the Division 1. And there's just a lot of reasons that making those sequels so close together is a problem, but depth of content, the original, because it's been built over the course of multiple years, is going to have more content. It's going to have more innovative content, and everyone's going to point back to the original and be like, I just want to be playing that with this new stuff added into it instead of an entirely new game. I lose all my gear, I lose all my progress, and it's not adding anything so unique that I'm like, okay, the sequel is a must play for me. I think that's a major issue and the reason why a lot of these looter shooter sequels struggle initially, right? So in order to for us to see sequels in the future, there's got to be a gap of multiple years to generate enough quality content to make it worthwhile for me personally. Then we look at the Division 1 specifically, and like I said, Dark Zone and Survival and some of these other more innovative modes didn't hit the same or weren't even included in the sequel. So while Survival might not have been the most played mode, it added something different to the gameplay loop that the Division 2 was absolutely missing. And I don't think they needed to cut and copy and paste the survival mode into Division 2, but they needed something to replace it that was going to make people just as excited to jump in. Same thing with the Dark Zone. They tried some changes to the Dark Zone, but it just never recaptured the same magic that the early days of the Dark Zone had in the Division 1. And that was a place that I actually wanted to spend a lot of my time. I play PvP in a lot of these looter shooters that have them, and it just did not feel the same whatsoever. It just felt like it was just missing that little bit of magic. Add into some of the other issues that the game had as far as acquiring loot and building your character, and it felt like it was a step back in some places. Now, they have improved that over the course of time, as something like Destiny has, but I just don't feel like it ever recaptured what made the game excited, because the Division 1 was always going to be the behind the eight ball with the fact that it's a bullet sponge heavy game and it's a third person game as well. So that's automatically going to make it not quite as exciting for a lot of people who want to really dive into the power fantasy of their video games. So because of that, the game has to add special elements to keep people engaged, in my opinion. You're always going to have a dedicated fan base with something like The Division. And really, it's the casual audience that's going to keep the game chugging along and excitement for it over the course of time really high. But that's just never really happened with The Division 2. Add into some of the problems that came from up top as the developers of the game were losing some of their ranks. We saw it with the Division Heartland being announced. We knew some of the developers were moving over to that project. There was also announced later through leaks that developers were moving to Avatar and Star Wars games as well, leaving the Division 2 to not really have enough people working on it to make it the game that everyone wants it to be. Instead, the game is chugging along, keeping people who are fully dedicated to the franchise happy, but it will never bring back those who are more casual players because it's not being backed by Ubisoft and the developers there, the higher ups really of those organizations. And for me, that's a major bummer. I would personally love to see them end new content on the Division 2, release the Division Heartland whenever it comes out, in this year, next year, whatever, and then a couple years from now, maybe 3 years from now, drop a new division or an overhaul, maybe the Division 2 Reborn, with a ton of innovation and new, fresh content. Because that's the only way you're going to get a casual audience to come back and get people like me, who is a fan of looter shooters in general, to really jump back into the game and give it a fair shake. We've seen with games like Fallout 76 and Warframe and other games that build over the course of time, you can make a game good and get people to come back, but you need something flashy to get people excited again, to get the word of mouth going. And while the Division 2, like I said, isn't such a bad game right now, it's just not what the Division 1 was and never really was capitalized on. I feel like this could have been a mainstay franchise in video games, and it's not because it never received the full backing. The sequel didn't from the higher ups, and that's just very, very much a bummer in my personal opinion. We had things like rerun seasons. That's always going to set the game back. You can't have a game as a service, an ongoing looter shooter game, and have repeat content over the course of multiple seasons where it looks like they were just going to let the game ride out. And then you try to make a comeback eventually by having new content, but it just wasn't enough to get people coming back. The content wasn't so exciting to draw the casual audience back in. And again, it feels like the game is just chugging along. Excited to have the core community it has. And again, I'm happy for those people who are continuing to play the Division, who really love the game, and that's the main game for them. I'm just thinking from this perspective of I enjoy these games the most when a lot of my friends are playing, when a lot of people I know are playing. We can jump into any activity together. We can help new people. We can jump into end game things together. But when I look at my friends list and it's barren of people I would be able to play with in a game like that's a looter shooter, it's just, for me, that's a major issue and something that causes me to not want to play the game. So there's also been recently a bug that happened where the developers couldn't update the game. They couldn't end the current season. They couldn't start the next season. And I think it just kind of sums up the stagnation of the Division in general. And it's really unfortunate. I'm somebody who I will defend the developers of any game pretty much vehemently. I don't think most of the problems in games like this ever lie with the developers themselves. More often than not, it's with funding or the higher ups giving them a unreasonable time frame, stuff like that. But yeah, it's just really unfortunate to see, and I wish there was more reasons for me to jump back in the Division 2. At this point, as bad as its launch was, I would say a game like Fallout 76 probably ranks higher for me personally than the Division 2 does right now. And if you would have told me that a couple years ago, I would have called you crazy. So I don't know. It's just a game that I hope makes a comeback, a franchise. I don't know about this specific game, but it's a franchise that I hope really comes back into the spotlight and shines in a way that it deserves to be having the spotlight on it. I really do. I want to love the Division again, and I hope that is the case. We'll see if Ubisoft ever lets that happen, or if they move on to bigger, flashier things, and we're kind of reaching the end of the Division's life cycle. So I feel like Heartland will probably be a big player into that. But much like with Respawn, we might see it where Heartland becomes the mainstay, right? Just like Apex Legends is, and then Titanfall is still nowhere to be found. We might see that with the Division as Heartland becomes the main feature of the franchise, and the base Division games don't really get the shine they once did. So we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Helps me out tremendously, shows you want to see more deep dives like this into various games. I think I'm going to check out Outriders next and what happened with that game. So definitely stay tuned for that. My name is JoPa. I hope you have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.